The Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration will come to order. A quorum is present. Representative Scott, have you had a chance to review the minutes?
I have, Mr. Chair, and I would move the minutes.
Representative Scott moves the minutes for March 3rd, 2025. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The minutes are approved. We have one bill today, House File 4, and I will move that House File 4 be recommended to be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. We have the bill before us. Representative Johnson, if you want to come to the table and tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Chair Niska, members of the board. I'm Wayne Johnson, representative of 41A. I'm here today. Thank you for the opportunity to present here House File 4 today. House File 4 is a result of a promise made to Minnesotans, a promise that we do not just look for new ways to spend money, but find ways to return money to hard-working Minnesotans. I believe we all want to help reduce the burden on Minnesotans, and this is one way. House File 4 is a bill to put on the ballot a constitutional amendment that when a surplus is found, which is 105% of the forecast for that biennium, that money over that will be sent to an account that is created that sends money back to taxpayers, whether income tax or property tax relief. So that is my bill, and I know there's a fiscal note along with it. Also, just want to make sure that everybody knows that on the ballot, the wordage will say, shall the Minnesota Constitution be amended to create a Minnesota tax relief account funded by the account of projected revenues that exceed 105% of projected expenditures that the legislature must use to refund or reduce state taxes. That is my bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. And we have a number of testifiers signed up, so I'm just going to start with some public testimony. First, I have on the list Jim Grathwohl and Sydney Spreck, if you want to come up to the table. Or are these Zoom? Jim is Zoom. So we'll start with Jim on Zoom. And you were, I know, asked to keep your testimony to 2 minutes, so please try to limit it to 2 to 3 minutes, please. You can go ahead, Mr. Grathwohl, if I'm saying that correctly.
Mr. Chair, members, Jim Grathwohl with St. Paul Public Schools. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify. Representative Johnson, thank you for bringing the bill forward. I'd like to testify in opposition simply because I think this imperils the state's ability to adequately fund a uniform system of public schools. As part of the forecast, I want you to, it'll come out tomorrow, look at the price of government report that goes with that, and you'll see that overall, the price of government over 30 years that we've been collecting data has stayed about the same 13–14% of state GDP. So for those who are concerned about bloated budgets and rising costs, actually taxpayers for government across the board are paying about the same as a percentage of their whole GDP. The thing that the bill doesn't recognize is we have significant fiscal cross-subsidies that arise from the state not fully funding special education and English language learner services. Statewide in FY23, that was about $600 million. Statewide in FY25, it's about $165 million. So we have $750 million unfunded by the state that comes out of basically school district general fund revenue. Our choices are to cut program or go to taxpayers and ask for tax increases to fund program that's not funded at the state level. So imagine, if you will, in my best Rod Serling voice, as school districts are cutting program and asking for tax increases, they're getting tax refunds in the mail from the state. There's a little cognitive dissonance there. So I think a best use, and fundamentally, I believe in the men and women who are elected to serve the state in the House and the Senate and the governor's office to make wise decisions every year to fund public education. So, and the other priorities of the state, rather than having an auto appropriation. So I think it's a great debate to have. I think we're best served by empowering the legislature and the executive to fund public education or all other services as you've been elected to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I have Sydney Spreck, and then the next on the list would be Eric Bernstein, if you want to come to the table. Go ahead.
Thank you. Chair Niska, Lead Long, and committee members. For the record, my name is Sydney Spreck, and I am a political affairs coordinator at MAPE. MAPE is a union of over 18,500 state workers across all Minnesota's agencies, boards, and commissions. Thank you for the opportunity to share our concerns with HF4. MAPE opposes the bill because it would greatly weaken Minnesota's flexibility to craft budgets that meet the state's long-term public investment needs, including the needs of our members who provide critical services like staffing direct care and treatment facilities, building and maintaining state IT systems, and supporting our state's correctional programs. Our members include a wide range of highly skilled professionals, and it takes resources to attract and retain a workforce that is capable of meeting the state's needs. Surpluses accrued during periods of strong economic growth are essential to funding investments in crucial programs and the staff needed to administer them. In 2023, for example, the legislature allocated $240 million from a surplus to MDH and the Public Facilities Authority, whose staff both include MAPE members, to map and replace lead pipes across the state. The bill before you would have restricted the legislature's ability to make that investment. The bill also fails to clarify which budget forecast should be used for a baseline, if inflation will be taken into account, or if the surplus will be assessed before or after deposits into the budget reserve account. The forecast also cannot predict the impact of federal funding changes, which leaves a large piece of the budget puzzle unaccounted for here. This policy would put tax cuts on autopilot. It would hurt basic state functions and critical investments in infrastructure updates and our valuable state workforce. We urge you to oppose this bill and oppose taking it up on the House floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spreck. Next, I have Eric Bernstein. Is Eric Bernstein here? Heather Burr. And after Heather Burr, I have Delia Syme. Go ahead, Ms. Burr.
Good morning. Chair Niska and the members of the committee, my name is Heather Burr. I have been a child support officer for Benton County for the last 4 years. I'm a public servant, a wife, a mother, a foster parent, and a member of AFSCME Local 1243. I'm here today to voice my opposition to HF4. I know that the goal of the bill is to ultimately give money back to Minnesotans. I understand that these are hard financial times for a lot of people. However, the constitutional amendment proposed will deprive us of the flexibility needed to adjust to financial forecasts. It would lead to further underfunding of public services and have rippling effects across our communities. In my position with the county, I help ensure that children receive support that they need and deserve. I work with both parents to make sure that support is equitable and provided to the child in a timely and consistent manner. I have seen underfunding from the state lead to fewer staff and resources. This can cause it to take longer for counties to get support established, modifications to be completed, and contempt proceedings to be filed. It can cause gaps in payments. It can make it harder on workers to maintain current address and employment information for parties. None of these things are equitable for the people they affect. On a personal note, my family recently became first-time foster providers. The social workers that we have worked with are enormously dedicated to their clients, while also being spread immensely thin. Counties are already understaffed with social workers and are in desperate need of more foster providers. Funding cuts could prevent people from fostering and could cause more harm to children already in need of protection. The children that we serve will not get a tax refund, but they will be severely affected by a system that does not allow for flexibility. This is just my experience in my department and personal life. I know that other departments are understaffed and would have difficulty functioning at a high level if we did not have enough access to adequate funding by the state. There is so much unknown right now, especially with potential cuts to federal funding, that is not worth locking us into a rigid tax rebate system. I ask that you vote no on HF4. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burr. Next, I have Delia Syme, and then after, I have Nan Madden.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Niska and members of the committee. My name is Delia Syme. I'm a third grade teacher in the Proctor Public School District and a proud member of Education Minnesota. I've been teaching for 6 years. My path to education was not traditional. Prior to teaching, I spent 14 years as a private practice attorney before entering the classroom. I'm also a mother to 2 middle school girls and a wife to a firefighter, all of whom rely upon wise investment in public services. I've always known there are challenges in our communities, but as a teacher, I was shocked by how deep those struggles run and how many families are barely getting by. Every day I see students coming to school without basic supplies, families struggling to access resources, and children who need more academic and emotional support than our system can provide. Our schools are doing everything they can, but we're stretched thin. That is why, if there's a budget surplus, there are so many ways these funds could make a real difference. It could be used to address critical gaps, ensuring teachers, support staff, and students have the resources they need. This means more public school counselors to support students' mental health, more reading specialists to help our struggling learners, fixing the Tier 2 pension system disparities so teachers can retire before their mid-60s, and most importantly, so we can stop the significant teacher shortage and attract qualified and dedicated professional educators. Our schools need help, our teachers need help, our students need help. But in a year like this, where budget cuts are likely, it's the working people and those on the margins who will suffer the most. Legislation like HF4 will only make it harder, if not impossible, to fund our schools, support educators, and give students the education they deserve. We elect you, our legislators, to represent our communities and to be flexible and responsive to the needs of those communities. Locking these restrictions into our state constitution will handcuff future legislators from doing what's needed. In some cases, it might be a tax rebate, as we've seen in certain years, but more often it will allow for a deeper investment in the chronically underfunded public services that our state values. For these reasons, I urge you to vote no on House File 4. Thank you, Chair.
Yep. Nan Madden, and then is Eric Bernstein here? You can come up to the table as well. Go ahead, Ms. Madden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Nan Madden. I am the Minnesota Budget Project Director at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. And thank you for the opportunity to testify today in opposition to House File 4. The Minnesota Council of Nonprofits has a longstanding position that budget and tax decisions should not be made in the Constitution. That position is informed by the harm caused in other states that have such limits, which is outlined in the handouts I provided to the committee. It's also informed by the harm done to our communities and public services when Minnesota's state revenues were constrained during a decade of frequent budget deficits in the 2000s. You at the legislature already have the authority to use projected budget surpluses for tax rebates or tax cuts, and to do that in a public debate that weighs the alternatives and implications of those decisions. This constitutional amendment takes away the ability of Minnesotans to influence the tax and budget decisions that impact their lives. It circumvents meaningful public debate, and it makes it difficult for the public to hold elected officials accountable for tax and budget outcomes. Instead, it turns important decisions over to an arbitrary formula that does not respond to current conditions, growth in the economy, demographic changes, or the priorities of your constituents. This amendment makes it harder to respond to a crisis or substantial change in circumstances, such as the dramatic reduction in federal funding for states being considered in DC. I'm especially concerned that this amendment could trigger tax cuts when tough times are on the horizon but not yet creating a deficit, and especially when revenues start to pick up coming out of a recession, which would hamstring our ability to recover. In a recession, policymakers make tough decisions to balance the budget. They tend to make deep cuts to public services that Minnesotans count on, And it also tends to happen that they shift responsibilities to local governments, which results in rising property taxes. And this amendment would essentially lock in those tough choices made to get through the recession. This amendment would also likely increase the state's cost of borrowing to invest in roads, water treatment, and other infrastructure because it would harm our state's bond rating. In conclusion, this proposal does not give you more tools to respond to the needs of Minnesota residents. Instead, it ties your hands. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Madden. Mr. Bernstein, go ahead.
Chair Niska and members of the committee, for the record, my name is Eric Bernstein, and I am the director of We Make Minnesota. We're a coalition of labor and grassroots organizations united in support of public investments for a more just and equitable state. We believe that public goods and services, from education to healthcare, roads, parks, and libraries, are the foundation that a strong economy and a prosperous society are built on. We advocate for the policies that support the state's long-term budgetary strength and stability. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective on HF4, which proposes a constitutional amendment to create an automatic tax cut in the instance of a projected budget surplus. Our members oppose this bill because it will weaken the state's ability to fund essential social and physical infrastructure and take decision-making power out of the hands of democratically elected lawmakers. The effect of this policy would be to exert a downwards ratchet on state funding, which would deplete state resources, weaken our infrastructure, and rob the public of important investment opportunities. The state already can and often has used budget surpluses to issue one-time rebates or permanent tax cuts, but leveling such cuts at a fixed rate and putting them on autopilot will only limit the legislature's ability to respond to contemporary context and pressing social priorities. It also ignores the necessary relationship between economic growth and public spending. Surpluses result most often from a strong economy, which both benefits from and depends on commensurate public investment. This is how we ensure education keeps pace with technology and public sector wages keep reasonable pace with those in the private sector. Otherwise, we would live with 21st century wealth, but 19th century classrooms and libraries. This policy also erases the possibility of collective prosperity that should be a goal of all societies and that has long been a calling card of Minnesota specifically. In closing, I'd like to address the foundational premise of this policy, which is that less public spending is always preferable. Our coalition, which includes public teachers, healthcare workers, and local government employees in every county of the state, finds that disposition highly objectionable. Our members in schools and hospitals and correctional facilities work hard to keep this state running. They don't always oppose all tax cuts, and they don't always support all tax increases, but the notion of a permanent automated tax cut in these circumstances is deeply troubling. We urge you to oppose it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Bernstein. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to testify? Member discussion? Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was driving in this morning, I actually thought a better approach might be to amend this to allow the state to buy every family in Minnesota a snowblower, which would actually have the benefit of boosting Toro, which is conveniently located in my district. So I will not make that amendment today.
We do not have an amendment deadline. We don't have any committee rules.
Next time, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Johnson, for being here and, for bringing this forward. I was reflecting on, and I know obviously you're a first-term member, so you weren't here. But a few years ago, we passed a bill to include inflation in our state budget forecasts. And I was reflecting on some of the opposition to that bill, where some members referred to putting the budget on autopilot, saying that our job is to provide oversight, that we should be encouraging scrutiny on our state budgets. One member even going so far as to say that by passing that bill, we were abdicating our responsibility as members of the House to be the appropriations body. Given that, and these were all comments made by members of your own party, I guess my question is, why should we lock in this kind of spending?
Thank you, Representative Coulter. Representative Johnson.
Chair Niska, thank you, Representative. But I think, I understand that thought, but I think the actions over the last 2 years knows that the legislature needs controls. And the reason is because there was $18 billion surplus, another $10 billion in taxes. And what are we hearing from our schools? We are hearing they're in a deficit. They desperately need money. We're hearing from the counties. It was brought up here. Counties, they're desperately needing money. And why is that? It's because the state cannot help itself from spending and demanding more. These schools are coming to us and saying the issue is they are being mandated and mandated and mandated with no funding coming along with those mandates. You have counties saying you are now pushing more and more service costs back to us, $200 million. What happened to that $18 billion that was there to take care of these needs? Yes, they got money, but then what happened is the state came back and said, we want you to do more, and we want you to figure out how to pay for it. We've had the schools, the READ Act, good program, nowhere near the funding. Now we're coming back and provided universal meals. Great theory, but now they're coming back and saying, we need you to do reporting, and if you don't do reporting, we're going to fine you for that. So now they're trying to figure out how to do that. You have counties coming to us and saying, paid family medical leave, safe and sick time, $200 million being pushed down to us, promised cannabis aid, and now we want to pull that cannabis aid away from you. That has nothing to do with the fact that we have put something in there that says we're going to provide some relief to homeowners if there is a surplus. And it said, yes, the legislature can police themselves. I think over the last budget or the last, when we were spending this, $2,000 was promised to homeowners and taxpayers. What it ended up being was $200. Why? Because the legislature said, no, we don't want to send you money back. That money is ours. We feel we're better with the money than you are, and we're going to go and spend it more and raise taxes. This is basically putting it in there, and Minnesotans are asking for, that once we send the money up there, you're not going to continue to find new ways to spend it. But if you've already taken care of the ways that already are in place to spend it, and there's money left over, you send it back to us. I think it's important, and I hear a lot of this is going to be too hard. What if, what if? Why is it so easy to spend $10 billion and tax another $10 billion? If you think about it, baffles the mind, and it's almost impossible to do. But it is so hard and nearly impossible to give a little relief to Minnesotans when they need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Follow-up, Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I guess that didn't really answer my question. And I'm glad to hear, actually, and I know you come from the world of local government as I do, so I'm glad to hear your concern about the services and the people who provide the services at the local level. None of that is addressed by the bill in front of us. Providing the assistance that is, I agree, sorely needed to ensure that our local governments can plow the roads and do other things, that's not addressed by this bill. Property tax relief. I was the author of the bill to convert our state renters credit into an income tax credit, automatically putting hundreds of dollars back in the pockets of folks who are disproportionately seniors and folks with disabilities. I absolutely agree that that's needed. That's not helped by this bill. That is hindered, in fact, by this bill. And that's just the stuff that I think we probably agree that we need to do, to say nothing of the things that we may want to do, like providing additional funding to our public schools, or, for example, a lot of folks have talked about complete elimination of income taxes on Social Security that would cost $1 billion a year, or $1 billion biennium, excuse me, and only grow. All of that is actively thwarted if this were to become law. So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Coulter. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Representative Johnson, it's good to hear that you say that our schools do not have enough funding. I guess my question then is, why would you offer a constitutional amendment that would lock our schools in at this level of funding? You know, that money that you're saying is being returned is not going to our schools. You're taking them, what your bill does is say, this is the amount of money that's going to schools. We're going to cap it here and not give you more money. Instead, we're going to give that to people who own property and people with the income tax. That's not going into our classrooms. So I guess why do we have a bill? If you agree that we have inadequate school funding, why do we have a bill before us that's going to leave our school funding where it is and not allow the legislature to provide more money to focus on literacy in schools?
Thank you, Representative Jordan. I believe his point was about the mandates we put on our local schools, but go ahead, Representative Johnson.
Thank you. Yes, you're correct. This bill has nothing to do to control legislatures from continuing to put mandates on our schools that are costing more funding to them. This is putting money back, and unfortunately, we are going to need more money back to our homeowners because the legislature continues to put more burden on the schools and the counties, and the only way they can pay for it is by raising property taxes. And this is one of those bills that if we have a surplus, can go back and have them start dealing with that. What we keep hearing is a concern that is going to limit your power to continue to figure out ways to spend and demand more stuff. That's what you're concerned about. So I want to give the money back. There's a continual belief that once the money gets here, it's our money, it's our responsibility to spend it, find new ways to spend it, and have no responsibility for it. This is getting the money back to the people if we have taken care of your certain bill. Think of it this way, you have your own budget, okay? And you have money left over. You create an account to save it for the future. You don't automatically go out and figure, oh, I have an extra $1,000, let's figure out something else we can spend it on. That's basically thinking about that way, is we want the government to think about the way we want people to do and people, I believe, do in saving for the future, not always be looking at new ways to spend it. There's another way to think about it is you go and you buy something. You find out you overpaid for it. You're fully expecting to get a refund for the overpayment. Or do you go to the store owner and saying, you can find, don't worry about it. I know you can find it a better way to spend that money than I can. Nobody does that. It's just the way it is.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Johnson, that didn't answer my question about funding schools. That's what I'm asking about. I'm asking about how your bill will hamstring Minnesota schools that you just said and acknowledged are underfunded. You know, my school district and many of the school districts that are represented by people around this table are facing deficits. And that's because in past years, the legislature has gone into deficits and used that school funding and tramped down on the generous amount of funding that is being spent. That has resulted in unequal funding opportunities for school districts. And how is this bill going to make it better? How does this bill help school districts' budgets? Because it's not about taxpayers paying this. We fund these programs. And then I have some questions about how, you know, we're funding this. You're locking us into this funding level that you agreed to is inadequate. What happens when President Trump dismantles the Department of Education, which accounts for 10% of our local school districts' budgets, pushing them further into a hole, and you're trying to make it impossible for us to actually fund those services that are for things like special education? How does your bill help us fund those schools that you acknowledge are underfunded?
Thank you, Representative Jordan. Anything further you want to add on that topic, Representative Johnson?
Mr. Chair, thank you. What are we supposed to do about education funding? This is a bill about funding our state's government. Education is the largest part of our state's budget. And you're not acknowledging that your bill is going to have a massive impact on the schools that our children go to. These are public schools. What are they supposed to do if we're not funding them when you're already agreeing that the level is there? How does this bill affect our school districts' budgets? Can you answer that question?
Representative Johnson.
Cherniska, Representative, I did answer your question. I know you didn't like the answer, and basically I came back. The answer is I went and sat down with many schools. We had schools coming in front of us at the workforce. The legislature is causing the issue at the schools. The schools are having the funding issues because of decisions you are making them do. And if you sit down and you talk to them, we had superintendents come in, we had associations of school districts come in. They said basically, stop, please stop continuing to tell us and making new programs and not giving the money to do it. Okay, so if you stop doing those programs, that's where the problem is. And if you want to continue to create spending, yes, that's not going to solve the issue, your desire to continue spending and demanding. That's not what this bill is designed. That could be another bill that maybe is brought up that limits what legislators can do. But that's not this bill.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Jordan, we've got a few people on the list, so briefly.
Thank you. I'll ask one question then. My district says the biggest impact on their funding is the special education cross-subsidy. That is the biggest issue. It means that my district is $30 million in the hole because they are paying for special education costs for students that go to school in other districts. How does this bill help us address that cross-funding shortage then? How does this help us close that gap and make sure that we're addressing the special education cross-subsidy?
Representative Jordan, thank you, Representative Jordan. Representative Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Niska. Representative, I don't know your district. What district are you in?
Representative Niska, I represent Minneapolis Public Schools, but every school district in the state is dealing with the cross-subsidy. That's a statewide issue. So how does this bill help us close that cross-subsidy for special education?
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I can tell you when Anoka Hennepin came in and visited and gave a presentation at the Minnesota Association of School Boards, that wasn't the issue that they brought up when their budget issues. So they were bringing up the issues that I mentioned. So.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Johnson, for bringing this. You guys have mentioned several times, either on the floor or in committee, about how we're not addressing the pressing need for cost of living and helping Minnesotans in a time of need. Here it is. We are bringing it, and you guys seem to be opposing it. We had that 40% spending increase to the state budget in 2023. We have 68% of Minnesotans living paycheck to paycheck, 58% of whom couldn't afford a $1,000 emergency expense today. We had, like he mentioned, Representative Johnson, an $18.5 billion surplus, $10.5 billion in excess taxes, and we are the largest greedy corporation in the state of Minnesota. The one that you guys love to decry, we are that corporation. We bring in, and we never give back. We have a $730 million state office building that we're paying for ourselves. We have $100 million to non-citizens, not even Minnesotans, that we're handing out. We have $1.1 billion to earmark nonprofits, $3 million of such. I called out Senator Hoffman for giving to the nonprofit that he is the executive director of. So that's self-serving government. 33% retroactive pay increase to legislator per diem. $7 million more for PCR programs to add funds to our own political campaigns. We gave $2.2 billion to schools, but we told them that they could only use it the way that we saw fit, not the way that they saw fit. The issue is not about how much money there is, it's about how we're spending it. We're missing every single opportunity to prioritize funding to actually go towards our teachers and allowing them to earn a livable wage. We're not addressing the cross subsidy. You guys had a 4 and 2 bill. We offered a 5 and 5. You guys said no to that. That was an amendment in the education omnibus bill in 2023. You said no. We're trying to spend responsibly. And you know what? Maybe this shouldn't be in our hands anymore because we're not responsible enough or understand basic economics enough to spend willy-nilly. We've proven that. So I 100% agree with this bill. And I know that we didn't have many testifiers here in support of your bill, but I guarantee you that they're out working right now. They're out working right now. We should be giving them some relief too. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Engen. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and question for the author. Your bill proposes to take anything that is after the state has set its budget, that the legislature has passed a budget into law. Anything over and above that, I believe you say on lines 1.16, that it's 105% over projected expenditures. So the conversation that we're having about this depriving other organizations or schools or cities or whatever, they will have been funded through the state appropriations. Is that correct?
Thank you, Representative Nash. Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative, for the question. That is correct. This is not, we're not cutting to create the surplus. It's all existing already programs that are in place.
And Mr. Chair, just to conclude,
Representative Nash.
the conversation that we've been hearing has been saying, oh, you're gonna deprive schools of this, you're gonna hurt cities with this, you're gonna hurt this organization. If the budget is set, then their money has been appropriated based on what we decide and pass into law out of the legislature. The projected surplus that Representative Johnson is proposing that we give back to the taxpayers is indeed that, a surplus, over and above the funding that has been received by the cities and school boards and all that for their base funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Nash. Representative Howard.
Thank you, Chair Niska. Representative Johnson, I'm wondering, are you aware how our budget deficit, it was a $6 billion budget deficit, how that was solved in 2011?
Thank you, Representative Howard. Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative. So I'm doing my math back. We're talking about 15 years ago, 14 years ago. No, I don't even think I started my city council venture yet, so no.
Representative Howard?
Oh, it was a pretty important year. It was our largest deficit. It was coming after the Great Recession, and we had a divided legislature. The solution that was brought forward was a 60-40 funding shift onto our public schools that deprived our schools of billions of dollars. And it took years to pay that back. Democrats paid our schools back, by the way. What would happen in that scenario under your bill if we had say a $3 billion shift onto our schools? Under your bill, could that money be paid back?
Thank you, Representative Howard. Representative Johnson, I think that goes to probably the projected expenditures in your bill. Can you respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative. Well, unfortunately, after having $18 billion surplus and a $10 billion tax increase, we are kind of looking now at a projected $5 billion deficit. How that happens, I have no idea. That's more math than I can get involved in. So the question is, would the legislature take that route to balance an ongoing budget deficit? The legislature decided at that time to use the schools as their piggy bank, to way to do that. At that time, a bill like this was not in place, right? Okay, so going forward, when you are sitting here and you're figuring out how to balance the budget, you would know what you can and can't do, what is there and not there for you to refund. So if you went and had that situation happen and you looked at our $5 billion upcoming budget deficit and you decided to take it from the schools, you know you'd have that challenge of trying to get that money back because this is in place, and you probably would look at a different way to address it instead of doing it that way. It wasn't in place back then, and so you're kind of thinking about how you go back then, but I would assume you'd handling the deficit differently. At least I would.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Howard, briefly.
Chair Niska, Representative Johnson, I would just say that you've sort of highlighted the challenge here with your bill and the constraints it puts on the legislature to address with problems as they arise that we might not see from year to year with our budget. In that scenario, basically we would be shorting our schools in perpetuity, essentially, under your bill. And so maybe a different legislature decides a different way to resolve a sizable deficit. Maybe they do it on the backs of, our seniors and people with disabilities, as President Trump wants to do with his cuts to Medicaid. But this bill would hamstring the legislature's ability to ever address those harms. And so I would encourage a no vote.
Thank you, Representative Howard. Representative Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if I could ask one of the testifiers a quick question. Would it be okay to recall one of them? Mr. Bernstein?
Yeah, Mr. Bernstein, if you're here. If you could come up to the table. Go ahead, Representative Scott.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Bernstein. Just a quick question. In the last biennium, you referred a lot to that, and I'm just wondering if you believe that the $16 billion or $18 billion of the surplus that was spent, do you think that that was spent appropriately and on good things?
Representative Bernstein, go ahead. Or Mr. Bernstein. Sorry for the demotion.
Chair Niska, Representative Scott, I've never been asked such an open-ended question in a committee before. I think for the most part, absolutely yes. I think you also have to remember that a lot of it was spent on tax cuts, which in my opinion was a poor decision. And I think the question about how we ended up going from such a large surplus to such a large deficit has a lot actually to do with permanent tax cuts that we passed in addition to spending increases and things that grew with inflation. Also, the difference between what was a one-time surplus that accrued from several years of, the budget deal that we missed in, was it 22? And then also a lot of federal COVID funds coming in. So obviously the optics of going from such a large surplus to a structural deficit, we're all familiar with how that looks, but I think you had most of that being one-time money that was spent on infrastructure, that was spent on other one-time investments, and then less of that was used for ongoing spending. And then obviously we know from the last forecast that this was sort of coming regardless. It has a lot to do with demographics. It has a lot to do with rising costs of programs that are rising in every state across the country. And so I don't think that the decisions, and I actually wrote a piece about this, I don't think that the decisions that were made in 2023 got us to this point. I think it was likely in under any scenario. And I also think that not all that money was spent in the sense that it was, spent on programs that are ongoing and growing in cost, but also a lot of it was one time and some of it was spent on tax cuts as well. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. Again, I apologize for the insult. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bernstein, so thank you for your answer. And then what do you make of the $10 billion in taxes that were raised? You said, some of it was spent for tax cuts. You seem to not like that, but what do you think of the $10 billion in tax increases? Like for things like your license tabs, tying the gas tax to inflation, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Scott. Mr. Bernstein?
Chair Niska, Representative Scott. I'm really happy to answer that question because I've heard this $10 billion number thrown around a lot. It's a 4-year number by my understanding, and it's also general fund and non-general fund. So I did this math once and it was like, I don't want to say the wrong number, but it was like if you want to say it was $10 billion in tax increases, then I think we have something like a $4 trillion economy or something like that to just make it like, proportional. I'm sorry, I'll get back to you with the correct number, but maybe it was 1.6 trillion, something like that. And so, the $10 billion number, I take issue with that because that's, the non-general fund transportation revenues as well as the general fund, and it adds all these different things in. Having said that, I think that it's a really tough job. I don't envy you all in trying to fund a state and local government system that meets all of our needs and that with the demographic challenges I have, which I know both sides care about, the shrinking workforce relative to the birth rate and the retired population. It's a real challenge. And I think, we have to meet it with bipartisan agreement that we've got to get there somehow. And so the taxes that were increased to fund long-term programs, I agree with that strategy. I think we need to do that. I do think we need to make sure that our dollars are spent very well. I think there's a healthy conversation to be had there, but I don't think it's wrong to raise taxes. Minnesota also has lower fees and charges than other states. So while we hear about our taxes being so high often, first of all, I'd say they're not that high. We're, as a country, far lower than every other developed nation on earth. But also that other states charge more in fees and charges than we do. So we do raise a lot of revenue in taxes. I know what the rankings look like, but in other states you pay more in tolls, you pay more in tuition, you pay more in all these other things that are also how we fund the government. So, it's part of the picture.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. Representative Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bernstein. I appreciate you answering those questions. I don't suppose the St. Paul Public School testifier is still on the line?
I am on the line, yes.
Oh, perfect. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Mr.
Kim
Grathwohl.
Grathwohl.
Okay. Well, thank you for staying on the line. I just had a question for you regarding all the mandates that came down over the last couple of years. Do you know approximately what the St. Paul Public School District is spending on those new mandates?
Thank you, Representative Scott.
You know,
Mr.
I could get
Grathwohl.
back to you with an exact number, but off the top of my head, the ethnic studies, we were already doing it. We started doing ethnic studies in 2019. Our cost to develop that over 3 years was about $250,000. Our students love it. We think it's great. And we oppose repealing it for the record.
So, Mr. Chair? Yeah, I'm just wondering, to the testifier, how much the St. Paul Public School Districts are spending on the issue of the unemployment for people that are only employed during the school year?
Thank you, Representative Scott. Mr. Grathwohl.
Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, I don't have that off the top of my head. I'd be happy to get that for you. We recall that we made some effort to get those costs funded by a special revenue fund. So the state in 23, the final budget conclusion, had a $135 million special revenue fund that reimburses that expense. One of the issues the 25 legislature faces is putting more gas in that tank, putting more revenue in that fund.
Mr. Chair?
And I can get you the exact number with a phone call after this hearing.
Yeah, I mean, we know that this is a major source of issue with all of our local school districts. Are these 60-some unfunded mandates from 2 years ago, from a year ago? And that was building on previous mandates that the schools were all asking for relief from. And I want to thank Representative Johnson for bringing this bill. It is clear that this bill would require the legislature to really prioritize spending so that we're not spending an $18 billion surplus on who knows what. I'm not saying every dollar was spent irresponsibly in the last biennium, but a lot of it was, and it's gotten us to this deficit. To say that Mr. Bernstein, to say that that's not the reason that we're here and facing a deficit, I think it's a blind spot. And I think, you know, the folks across the aisle are all nodding about the cross-subsidy and, oh, that's the major source of issue. But when it comes to talking about all of these mandates that you've placed on the schools that they cannot even abide by, not to mention they don't even know what the paid family and medical leave is going to cost them, for you to not nod about all the things that you did to this budget in the last 2 years is very disingenuous. You asked for flexibility. Over there talking about flexibility. You had flexibility. You had complete DFL control over the last 2 years. And what we got is moving us into a deficit. Maybe less flexibility is in order. I think this is an excellent bill. It holds we as legislators more accountable to every taxpayer dollar that is spent. That's what's lacking in Minnesota right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott. Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess in talking with my 3 school districts, I don't think they have paid any money yet for that unemployment insurance. That's a fund that we set up that is going down and has plans to no longer have money in that fund, but I believe the last 2 years, none of our school districts have paid that, is my understanding. I guess I have a question for the bill author. So I heard you say that this is giving money back to the people, but it looked like through your bill that I wouldn't qualify as one of those people. I'm a taxpayer. I'm not a homeowner anymore. The way that the housing market is, I may never be a homeowner anymore, sadly. So I'm just at the whim of of landlords or, corporations who might own the places that I get to rent. So show me in the bill where I would get money back in this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Purcell. Are you an income taxpayer? Representative Johnson?
Mr. Chair Niska, thank you, Representative, for the question. That's exactly the question I was going to ask. Do you not pay income taxes?
Representative Purcell, since we're discussing your tax situation?
There's certain things that I'm not willing to put on the record. I am an income taxpayer. So then would that mean that I get less money back if I'm not an income taxpayer and a property taxpayer? I'm just sort of wondering how I shake out in this legislation.
Representative Purcell, it is going to be a little difficult to talk about your tax situation without information about your tax situation, but go ahead, Representative Johnson, to the extent you can answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Within the bill, it is giving these options for the legislature to decide. You can either give it back as a income tax refund, or you can do it back as property tax. So it would be the legislature that would be deciding that. So if you're concerned that you're not going to get from one particular fund, I would say you'd talk to your legislator friends and say, hey, I want this to go towards income tax and not property tax, because you don't have any property tax there. But it's both there, either property tax or income tax. That is up to the legislators to decide when that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Purcell?
And just to be clear, there's no mechanism to give it back for sales tax, right? So we're just only looking at property tax and income tax as the mechanisms, correct? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Purcell, Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Chair Niska. Representative, that is correct. There was two methods to give back, which was income tax or property tax in this bill.
Representative Purcell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have kind of one follow-up to that. So I guess then I see this, giving money back to the people as not being an equitable way to give money back to the people. If certain folks who may never own property, maybe they don't make enough to do their income taxes. Thankfully, I'm not on the tax committee because I don't fully understand that process. I know younger generations are worried about not ever being able to buy a house. I heard Representative Engen talk about self-serving government. I don't have a nonprofit to be able to give back to. I don't have law partners who I can hire to get funds or friends in high places. So I guess I just have real concerns on this bill about it being equitable to all people of Minnesota. Thank you.
Frederick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Johnson, I have not checked the bill introductions for every member of this body, but I would guess that it'd be pretty close to every one of us, both Republican and Democrats, have introduced some sort of bonding bill for projects in our districts. And if it's not everyone, it's going to be close. Excuse me. When it comes to our ability to bond, our bond rating is important because that tells us what our capacity is. And the credit agencies typically, when states like hamstring themselves with bills like what you're proposing here, with ideas like what you're proposing, it downgrades, our credit scores get downgraded, which then would impact our ability to bond, which would then impact our ability to invest in all of our districts. So I'm curious about if you've thought about the impact your bill would have on all of our districts from like a bonding perspective.
Thank you, Representative Frederick. Representative Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Niska. Thank you, Representative. I'm glad you asked that question because I was not able to get that answer in the last committee. As a former city council member for Cottage Grove that had a AAA rating, as a former Washington County commissioner that had triple, I believe, rating for many years, we're very proud of it. I'm well aware of what goes into agencies deciding whether they should be allocating AA or AAA rating and stuff like that. And one of the criteria is responsibility of the entity. Responsibility is not just spending, 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 and not being responsible for where the money is coming in. It's having an overall picture of being responsible of the money coming in and not constantly just going to the well to try to look for more money. I would not bring this bill forward. I was very proud, and I was part of many, many pictures and awards at the county level of our bond rating. And I was very aware what we needed to do and what went into that. I would never bring a bill forward that I thought would endanger a AAA rating and put more burden on the state. Thank you.
Representative Johnson. Representative Frederick, follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a bit confused because when you look at what other states have done on what you're proposing here, the impact is a downgrade in credit ratings, which then would impact our ability to bond. And so when you say that you wouldn't bring a bill forward that would impact our credit rating, yet similar bills like this in other states have that exact effect, there seems to be a disconnect between what you're saying the intention is versus the actual impact of your bill. And I would hope that that would be explored more before you would continue to push this bill, because I do believe it will have a negative impact on us, as we've seen in other states. Moving on from that, there's been a lot of conversation this morning about the 2023 bonding bill. And part of that conversation this morning is that we should have given that money back to taxpayers. The numbers at the time, if we would have taken that entire surplus and given it back to taxpayers, would have been a few $1,000s per taxpayers-ish. I want to say that that's really short-sighted. And the reason I say that is because in my district, I was advocating for bonding dollars to go to a wastewater treatment plant. It had to get upgraded, and there was two different ways to do that. One was increase rates to increase rates to everyone served by this facility. The other one was through a state investment through a bonding bill. And I was lucky enough to get, through advocacy that I made, so maybe it wasn't just luck, but to get the dollars needed to make that investment in my community. Because the state came in and made those investments, we as a legislature are saving every ratepayer in my district over the course of the new facility $30,000 to $40,000. Now compare that to the one-time check of here's a couple thousand, because we took that money and said we are going to invest in our communities across the state. We're actually saving people across the state much more dollars because we're acting collectively. And this bill, because of its restricting of those, one, it just reduces the total amount of money in general, but two, it would also impact our ability to bond, actually economically hurts Minnesotans. Because not only does it not give us any flexibility, it makes it so we can't make those investments that save people like those in my district a lot more money because we're able to make those investments. And so I encourage the committee to vote no on this bill because it will economically harm Minnesotans. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Frederick. Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple quick questions and then a comment. Would I be able to get a rebate on my lake property taxes?
Representative Cagle, can you provide some more info? We're doing personal tax advice in this committee?
No, I'm just curious because, Mr. Chair, a lot of people own multiple homes, including me. And so I'm curious if I would be able to get a tax rebate on my second property.
So the question is about what the term property taxpayer means, I believe.
Correct.
Representative Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Niska. Thank you, Representative. Again, I believe that would go back to the legislators that were responsible when that account, if that account, again, the state has put itself in a projected $5 billion. We have to remember, we have a projected $5 billion deficit coming up. Will we ever see the amount of surplus that was available for this legislature to give back to taxpayers again in the near future? Probably not. But if that happens, and if this passes, and voters choose, remember, this is providing a choice to taxpayers to have this happen. This bill is about putting up for a vote for taxpayers to do this. They may say no, they may say yes, we'd like to have some money come back. If all that happens, and we get another surplus, and that account is created, then those members that are on that committee or are responsible for deciding, or we decide the vote, how that money is going to be spent, and it is decided that it's going to go to those who paid income tax into the state, then no, you wouldn't, because it wouldn't be going towards property taxes. If it is decided to go to property taxes, they would have to decide at that point, is it the ones that only have one property? Or will it go to those who are lucky enough, as yourself, to have multiple properties? I don't know what the percentage of Minnesotans are that have multiple properties. So that would have to be left up to, basically, up to members like you to decide where that money would go. So if all that comes together, then that would be decided by you.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. So it might be pretty easy to decide homesteaded property or something like that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's still up in the air, I hear. And so then I have a question too, again, so if we do decide to go to property tax income, and we're limiting the ability for us to support our local communities, isn't the only thing that they have to turn to then raising property taxes?
Thank you, Representative Cagle. Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Chair Niska. I guess you're going to have to either restate or rephrase your question because I didn't follow.
If we starve governments, if the state is starting to starve local governments, what mechanism do they have to fund local units of government?
Representative Cagle, thanks. Go ahead, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Niska. Are you referring to an instance like the governor's budget is trying to do right now, where he's trying to take $200 million back from the from counties to pay for other programs that he wants to do so he can try and claim he's balancing the budget or having some sort of a tax cut? I don't understand why a surplus could be claimed to be starving the county, because we're not telling the county to take money out of their budget to give the money back in property tax. They would be coming from a surplus from Minnesota taxpayers who have helped create that surplus.
Thank you.
Representative Cagle.
Thank you. So I guess, Mr. Chair, I guess what I'm hearing is that it's going to kind of become a downward spiral of property taxes. I'm also really concerned about what will happen to our budget reserves if we're only, if we set aside 105% of projected expenditures. Does that include budget reserves? I guess I'm just really confused, and I guess you probably don't have an answer on that because we'd have, with the constitutional amendment, this isn't actually a bill, then we would have to do the rules. So I guess I really want to just kind of take a minute and apologize to public servants. I'm really sorry you guys are being subjected to this. I don't think that you're villains or that you waste our taxpayer money. I think that you really give us support. I was just talking to a social worker on the way in here, and she's really concerned about the fact that she had a patient come in for a surgery who was suicidal. The reason he was suicidal was because he didn't have a place to live. And so, that social worker was able to help this person, even though they were just in for a routine surgery, help them get services and get them into housing, and that helps stabilize people. And so I just don't see how our public servants and the people that are assisting folks out there, you know, I think you provide very valuable services, and I hope that we continue to support us, or that we can continue to support you. This constitutional amendment says to me that the work's too hard. We don't want to do it. And so I think that our I'm just kind of curious if anybody's listening right now. I just, you know, I just really wonder, I'm sorry, we got elected to do this job. We have to make hard decisions. We did not, do we want to move to an all proposition state? I mean, that's what California does. Like, you guys seem to hate California, but they're doing, you know, all propositions. And so I just don't understand why you want to advocate responsibility for your job. And I know that my constituents sent me here to do hard work. Again, everybody's looking at their phones. And so I just really want to ensure my constituents that I am here to do the hard work and that I'm listening to you and that, you know, this is valuable work we do. Our constituents send us here to do this work. How many times have you guys heard that, man, I would never be able to do your job? So I just really think that we need to kind of chew on that for a bit and realize that our constituents sent us here to do this work because it's not something that they, you know, it's not something that they have expertise in, and that's why they elect us. It's because they trust us to do this work. So I would just encourage everybody to, let's take on the hard work instead of pushing it off.
Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative, for this conversation today. And I think the intent of this shows that Minnesotans want us to make life affordable. I mean, clearly that's something that everybody's concerned about on both sides of the aisle. There were many conversations on, you know, sales tax and who qualifies in these things. But, you know, in the last session, we had bills for, you know, sales tax removal for baby items and for school supply items and for, you know, multiple things. Disability, veterans who are disabled to have a further exemption on their property taxes. We got it all through the floor and then it was stripped out. Things that were going to help people back in all of our communities didn't happen. And so that was with an $18.5 billion surplus. So people are frustrated. And I think, you know, now the independent tax policy research that is nonpartisan, that's Minnesota Tax Foundation, put out it's probably been on all your desks, I got it too. Look at it and it's like Minnesota is ranking 44th for the total competitiveness index on our taxes, all of it. You know, so you're looking at property taxes, individual income taxes, all of it. We're 44th in 2024. In 2022, we were 39th. So the issues people are looking at is they need more money in their wallet. They're busy working at home. We work hard. Every government employee pays taxes too. They're working hard. But it's all about a reasonableness and balance. We likely will never have an $18.5 billion surplus again, to your point. And the choices were made, and there's consequences. There are districts that right now are in unfortunate positions of deficits, layoffs in billions, are millions, which is really hard to fathom when we had an $18.5 billion surplus. And that's happening, the counties, the shifting of government money, government programs here from the state going down to the counties. I think it's closer to $400 million that's going to the counties in the governor proposal that will definitely shift to affect everyone in the state of Minnesota. So I understand the intent of the bill. I think taxpayers are asking for where do they count in this? In every position that they work in life, just saying, what about me? And this is to give them the opportunity then to make those decisions and to know that there's some balance. There's other states that have done this. Colorado has done this. Many other states have. So it's something that I think is a deserving conversation to have reasonableness, to have responsibility, to just not have government grow by 40% in a 2-year period. That's unsustainable. And it's off. It's definitely, the source is coming from 5.7 million Minnesotans who are paying in the system. And so we have to find a reasonable way. That is the job of this body. And so I appreciate you bringing this bill.
Thank you, Representative Zalesnkar. Representative Hollins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative Johnson, for bringing this bill. I think this is a good conversation for us to be having. It's a necessary conversation. I feel compelled to speak because I just had a town hall with over 200 people participating in my district. And the conversations we had were about what are we going to do if the federal funding and the chaos in DC trickles down to what we're doing here in Minnesota. What are we going to do? Because honestly, the people in my district aren't looking at me and saying, I'm taxed too much. And I'm going to tell you, I don't have a rich district. They're not saying that they're being taxed too much. They're saying, I am worried about my neighbor freezing to death. I am worried about children going hungry. I am worried about basic services not being accomplished, healthcare providers not being able to do their job, folks not being able to get the services that they need with their elderly. That is what they are worried about. And that is what we fund with this money. It doesn't go to nowhere. It doesn't just disappear. Do you know what I hear most about? Parents being happy that we provided school lunches and breakfast to their kids, child tax credits, increased rates for PCAs, things like that. That's what I hear about. Nobody is coming to me and saying, I want $500 back. And especially in this moment when we're gonna have to make some difficult decisions with funding cuts coming from the federal government, I am surprised that we would be talking about trying to give tax dollars back to people who are not asking for it and who don't want to see children in their neighborhood die. Because that is a real possibility. If they cannot afford heat, if they do not have a place to live, if they do not have food to eat, this is the reality that we're facing. And I'm telling people, I told people at the town hall, you do not want to talk to me, you don't want to see the reality that is going to be coming our way. It is terrifying. And even if there are people in your districts that are asking for money back, and I am looking to all of you, because realistically, more tax dollars come from my district in the metro and then go out to greater Minnesota. So if your folks are saying they want to pay less in taxes, they are going to be heartbroken when they see their neighbors dying. That is the reality. That is what this money goes to, and there's absolutely no way that I could support doing that. I am willing to have a conversation with you about more responsible spending, about trying to figure out how to make sure that what we are doing is, on point, that it is responsible, that we are spending within our means. But the reality is, yes, and transparent, but the reality is these funds are going to be necessary. They really, really are. And I don't know how to get that across to people. I keep referencing a case that came from Detroit recently where a woman was sleeping in her van with 4 children in a casino parking lot because she could not get housing, and 2 of her children died from hypothermia in the back of that van. That is what we are looking down the barrel at. And I personally cannot accept the idea of children dying. Laugh about it.
I wasn't laughing, I was laughing at something else, I'm sorry.
Texting. It is an unacceptable reality. And to give, honestly, I'm not just you, right? I'm the only person that's representing St. Paul, but to give any of you money, give your constituents money back and allow children in my district to freeze, I will not abide by that. I cannot allow that. Thank you.
Lead Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Johnson, I think that a lot of the premise of this is that projections for our budget are static and that what happens when we get a forecast is going to be the case for the remainder of the biennium. And I think that we have the perfect examples in what's happening with the federal government now about why that is ludicrous. And so a couple of questions for you. One is, we know that the budget forecast and is locked in. The one that's going to come out on Thursday was related to numbers from a month ago. And just this past Monday, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta adjusted its GDP forecast down to negative 2.8% for the first quarter. The week before it had been at positive 2.3%, and this was as a result of Trump's threats to put tariffs on our allies of Canada and Mexico and the economic impact that that would have on our economy. So that's not going to be accounted for in the forecast that comes out on Thursday, but that will affect the revenues that the state is going to be taking in. And so under your proposal, would there be any ability to adjust for those types of economic changes after the forecast is locked in?
Thank you, Representative Long. Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Chair Niska. Thank you, Representative Long. Well, I can tell you, no, nothing will happen because this will not be law. The voters have not voted for it. We have not voted for it. This is something that would be on an upcoming election for future forecasts to happen. So what is happening tomorrow, what happens tomorrow, what happens the next budget season would not be affected by what we're talking about today. So if you're asking, how would we come out of it? Based on what the forecast will be for tomorrow, and if it comes in as a negative or if it's positive, it won't matter. We haven't put this into law yet.
Representative Johnson, I think he's asking about if this were in effect in the scenario that he's talking about, how would that affect the meaning of projected expenditures and projected revenues? If the budget does change, if the projection does change, does that change the meaning of projected revenues and projected expenditures if this were in the Constitution?
Thank you. You're asking me to play a lot of what ifs into 4 years into the thing. What if we have a $5 billion surplus? Homeowners, those who pay taxes, are going to get some money come back. So that is what could happen in 4 years. If what happened in this situation happened in 4 years, and are you saying, I guess I need a little bit more clarification. Because the way the bill is, my understanding is it would be taking the second projection or the second forecast, which would be the one coming out in February. And so you're projecting that it would come in at a higher rate. Do we have fiscal here?
Yeah, if Ms. Adrians, if you want to come, and I think maybe the language we're trying to understand in the constitutional amendment would be like on line 1.16, 105% of projected expenditures as determined in one of the two most recent forecasts for the general fund. So maybe if Ms. Adrians, if you could help us understand how Representative Long's question or hypothetical scenario would work with that language.
I guess the question I need answered is, what would the surplus need to be on forecasted tomorrow for this to be a factor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and representatives. I think, so the way that the bill language is written right now, it does say that it sounds like there's a choice between which economic forecasts you could choose to do this, and then there is some direction that's missing. So I think if in the future you wanted to be able to be responsive to more to updated information, for example, that would be something that the legislature would have to determine in the future if this were to pass as a constitutional amendment.
Thank you. And yeah, and I stopped reading, and the next words were, as the legislature may determine. I think that's what you're referring to. Yeah, follow-up, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the language is one of the two most recent forecasts for the general fund, as the legislature may determine. So the legislature can choose which of those two forecasts it wants to pick from, but that would be the November forecast or the February forecast. And so in the hypothetical that I'm presenting, which is not that far-fetched because it's happening right now, the February forecast, only a month old, we're seeing actual GDP projections of a 4.5, 5-point swing over just a month. So we would be locked in under this constitutional amendment to making cuts when we wouldn't actually have the money to cut, when we would actually be seeing revenues decline because of a change that happened over a month. And that is not that far-fetched. We deal with emergencies all the time. We have dealt with pandemics that we didn't expect that come up. One other area of the federal budget I'm interested in getting your take on, Representative Johnson. Are you concerned about the proposed Medicaid cuts?
Thank you, Lead Long. Representative Johnson.
I am a representative of in the House, I'm in the House of Representatives. We have federal people. I know some people like to divert what's going on at out there. I know there's a lot of negotiations. I have learned many through some hard lessons. Do not follow what you see in the news today as being going to be the true news tomorrow. My understanding, a budget hasn't been set yet. The cuts actually haven't been put in place yet. So until I see what really is happening, then I'll get concerned. Otherwise, we have enough challenges going on right here that concern me that I don't get involved in the federal level. We have people that take care of that for us.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Long.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, that may be why you didn't sign the letter that some of your colleagues did, but there were 14 Republican legislators who sent a letter to the federal delegation expressing concern, and I'll just read one paragraph from it. Drastic reductions in Medicaid funding have the potential to impact the 1.4 million people we serve and place incredible pressure on our overall state budget. There are no other sources to make up the lost federal share beyond severely impacting the seniors and those with disabilities who we serve. This is contrary to how we Republicans respect the aged and the vulnerable. So this certainly is a conversation that's happening at the federal level, but it has a direct impact on the state budget because federal Medicaid funding is 1/6 of the state budget. And so the proposal that you're talking about here, Representative Nash made a comment earlier about, oh, it's 5%. We got a 5% cushion. Well, when we're talking about 1/6 of the state budget that could be impacted by federal Medicaid cuts, the projection right now from our state Office of Management and Budget is that the budget resolution that was agreed to last week would result in about $3 billion in biennium cuts to Medicaid. That is a far greater percentage than this cushion that is in your proposal. So how would we respond? And this is a hypothetical. So right now, if this were in effect, House File 4, and the federal budget resolution that was passed last week results in $3 billion in cuts to our state budget, how would we, and that happened after the federal budget forecast, how would we respond?
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Representative Long. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've been around here much longer than I have. How many times has something come out of the House stayed the same after the Senate got involved or the governor got involved? I think it's changed. I'm more concerned right now, before I get into hypotheticals, what's happening at the federal level. What if DOJ comes in and finds $3 billion and $4 trillion of savings, which could happen too? I'm more concerned what we're doing locally, what the governor's trying to do is burden homeowners in counties and in schools. And right now that concerns me more than what's going on at the federal level, because that's closer to home. That is something he's projected. So I'm more concerned about that, so I'm not going to sit here and start going into what-ifs at the federal level, because things have changed left and right. We know how negotiations, we know how President Trump goes into negotiations. Things could change, and those cuts could go away based on a negotiation that is done. So.
Thank you. Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in both my hypotheticals, the answer is basically I don't have an answer, which I understand, because they're tough situations and tough questions, but those are situations where we would want the flexibility as a legislature to be able to address them in real time. And your constitutional amendment would prohibit us from doing that. And these are not far-fetched. You said yourself, the news today may not be the news tomorrow, and I agree with you. We, tomorrow, might be facing a very different budget situation than we did in the February forecast, but yet this bill would prevent us from doing the work. We face emergencies at the state level all the time. Right now, we're looking at, a potential huge hit to our future growth because of reckless trade policy. We're looking at a potential impact to our state budget that we have never seen before, the likes of, with the cuts to Medicaid that are being proposed. These are situations that are all happening after the federal budget forecast. They're all going to happen after Thursday's announcement, and yet we would have no ability to address them with the proposal that you have before us. So I've heard a lot about spending choices that we made over the last 2 years. I understand that there's disagreement with those. The remedy is not to lock us into reckless budget policy, it's to win elections. If you didn't like the choices we made, win more elections, and then you can make different choices. But it is our job as legislators to make those choices. That is what people sent us here to do. So regardless of which side of the aisle you are on and which choices you would make in a particular circumstance, locking us into budgeting that gives us no flexibility to address real-time needs and changes in the budget is foolish. And so I urge us to vote no.
Thank you, Lead Long. Representative Johnson, any closing comments?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you, Chair, for letting me present to you. I sit here, and one of the things that I have learned over a period of time and what I'm hearing and prevents a journey to greatness, why businesses don't succeed and organizations don't succeed. I hear a lot of fear right now. Those who are against it are fearful. You know what they're fearful of? They're fearful of their constituents. There was a massive shift changed in this last election. It was changed by those who went to their constituents, not just a town hall size, not just an email size, not just a meeting at the grocery size, but 30 to 40,000 people were heard, and they said, we want our money back. We don't want to see constant ways to spend. Spending does not make life easier on people. Spending makes life harder. And we've seen it at the food shelves. Every time you want to put more money into a program, more people show up at the food shelf because their life becomes more unaffordable. There is no ideas coming out of here making life more affordable. It is making more challenge. And if you want proof of that, see the record number of people going to food shelves, the record number of people coming in for assistance. We cannot be afraid to put this forward to the voters. And we have to remember what we choose here, what we choose on the floor, what is chosen in the Senate, what is chosen by the governor, doesn't turn this into law. This puts it on a ballot. Who is turning this into law or a constitutional amendment is the voters. If you really want to hear what the voters think and they don't want their money back, like many of you said, you're going to get a resounding response right there. They are the ones that are come to you and say whether they trust the legislature to do what you claim they trust you to do, or they may say, we don't believe you can do it. But we cannot be afraid to go to voters. We cannot be afraid to give voters an option towards their future and whether they feel they have a better use for their money, for their success, and their affordability. That's what this does. So remember, it's not this side and that side. What we're choosing today is give the voters of Minnesota something they rarely get other than during election night, to choose to succeed and choose a path to a better way to afford their future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. I renew my motion that House File 4 be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
Mr. Chair, I request a roll call.
Roll call requested. The clerk will take the roll. Chair votes aye.
Vice Chair Engen. Aye. Lead Long.
No.
Representative Coulter, excuse me.
No.
Representative Frederick.
No.
Representative Hollins.
No.
Representative Jacob.
Jacob, yes.
Representative Cagle.
No.
Representative Purcell.
Purcell, no.
Representative Schultz.
Yes.
Representative Scott.
Yes.
Representative Steer.
Yes.
Representative Zalezdikar.
Yes.
There being 7 ayes and 6 nays, the motion prevails. That concludes our agenda for today. The meeting is adjourned.